This is Kreskin. I have decided, because I think it's very important and timely, to repeat a certain segment of a piece that we did before that gave us the largest response I've ever had in my series, What's on My Mind. Incidentally, it's the 4th of July right around the corner. And my brother was in the Marines, and then after that entered the police force in Essex County for 20 years. I've never been more proud of anyone in law enforcement. Joe did a fantastic job, as so many police are today with the challenges. The decrease, if what I'm hearing is true, in the amount of police in New York can be followed by a very easy prediction. If that's going to happen, you will see a gigantic increase in crime in the city. And at the same time, simultaneously, you will see a tremendous decrease of those living and working in the city. To be continued. Watch. But what I'm going to discuss with you now is something that has been weighed in my mind for many, many months. I did not expect it to reach a climax in quite the way it has now, but I wrote out months ago that if we did go to a suspension of our lifestyle and the closing down of our society and inhabiting most of the time inside a building or a house, that if this went more than 2.5 months, there could be repercussions. Well, almost 70 days later or so, we have something that I never foresaw, and of course, that deals with the tragic police killing of George Floyd, and our hearts go out to the family. I've just seen an excerpt in their expressions that they appreciated the peaceful expression and thoughts about their brother and son, but not the violence. Yes, what I foresaw taking place was not a killing, but I foresaw the dilemma and the release of stress that in some way or another would be taken advantage of in our society when the society was in a sense repressed for so long a time. People had to break loose. They had to find ways of getting into crowds. They had to find ways of joining, even though the rules were certainly still that you could not meet in crowds, and even churches in many cases were still closed by our all-wise political leaders. I don't really say statesmen, because I'm not sure we really have statesmen anymore. I am concerned, it is tragic, starting with Minneapolis, the onslaught of chaos that we see happening so widespread. And I realize that protesters are part of our lifestyle. We have a right for protest. But there's a difference between protests and riots. And by the way, those that are riots, with very few exceptions, are not true American citizens. No, the spirit of our life has been to celebrate other people's opinion and not condemn them, and certainly not riot. I would have never dreamt, and I say this having worked with over 80 police cases in support of police, my brother a policeman, 18 years, a dedicated man in law enforcement in my family for many, many decades. I would never dreamt that I would see the day when, whether it took place in Minneapolis or some other state, that a police station would be burnt to the ground. No. That would be the same as burning part of our military. That would be allowed to take place would for me to be a colossal obscenity. And I do mean obscenity. The question now is the follow-up of that. Of course, you had churches burned. You had a church in New York, one of our great churches that presidents have visited through the decades. You had it filled with graffiti and what have you. You've had windows, boarded up windows, knocked down believe it or not, by kids that were under the age of 16 or 17, 8 or 10 or 12 of them. I'm not necessarily blaming the kids, although they better find out they're responsible. But it does say something. It says something very seriously about the quality of parenthood, as teachers whom I revere have been hinting to me for a number of years, because some of the things stated to students in grade school and high school, some of the remarks, I would not get away with it as a kid. I'd be on someone's lap and my rear end would be wrapped to tenderness. But then again, I gather that our setting is changing. Incidentally, these riots that took place have really almost nothing to do with blue and white issues, black and white issues, all the white and what have you. These are basically excuses, because while the gathering, the peaceful gathering in memory of Floyd and with respect to police is an admirable scenario, the riots, and hear me when I say this, the breaking into buildings, the burning down of buildings, people bringing into New York and other cities vans where they would walk out of a store with bolts of material, boxes of material. These are criminals. These are gangsters. They're the scum of the earth. And yes, they must pay. And the price, as I see it, are bars on the wall. I don't care if there's an international plague. That's where they need to be housed. This is a world that we cannot live in anymore, because part of the security and the greatness of the United States is that we live in safety and that we are protected by our military from outside and inside forces, and by our police from criminals and gangsters. To find in one city that 100 and some businesses were almost totally destroyed is unconscionable. And then when you saw at night, this is a vision which I will never forget as long as I live, live scenes that our TV news people were covering, in which there were mobs on the streets and there were no police in view and no firemen as buildings were burning and what have you. Blame the police? No. Something tells me that they were told to stay away from that area, even though these mob crises were created and organized some weeks and weeks ago for the day that they found an excuse to blow up. No, this is something that has to find a responsibility. And I look upon our so-called leaders, our political mayors and governors, to allow this to take place is unconscionable. It reaches the point that the only security, and one thing we need to learn, and you need to think about this, folks, is you now have video proof that if there are break-ins and vast rioting in your area, you may not have no protection. You may have no protection for your home. You may call the police, but they may be sequestered in some other area. I never thought in my entire life, I swear to you, I never thought I would turn to the concept of guns, because I have felt there are too many guns in our society, and in many cases they're out of control. But I believe if this is the setting that we're beset with at this point, that all of you, and if you own a gun, make sure you have the training to handle it properly. And if you have children, you make sure you have extraordinary security for that gun. But the only answer, as I see it right now, is all of you. We all need a gun in our home to protect our property, because no one has a right to break into our home and steal while they seem to have the right to do this. with stores, even jewelry stores. But know what you're doing, because there's always a chance that you have a gun in your hand. You may have to use it. I'll see you next week, folks. Be the good Lord willing.